Son. There's a kind of silence that hurts more than shouting ever could. That night at dinner, that silence wrapped around me like a cold fog. My boy, Ethan, sat across from me. Proud, smiling, introducing me to the woman he said he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. Her name was Camille. A tall, elegant young woman with sharp blue eyes and a smile that could charm anyone in the room, except me. The moment she stepped through my door, something inside me shifted. Maybe it was the way she looked at my old house, her eyes scanning the walls, the furniture, the pictures, as if she were evaluating it, not appreciating it. But I stayed quiet. I didn't want to ruin Ethan's evening. He'd been so happy, telling me for weeks how special she was. I remember saying, "Welcome home, dear. Make yourself comfortable." And she replied, "Merci," with a soft laugh. I smiled back. She didn't know I'd lived in France for nearly 10 years after my wife passed. I used to teach English there, but I didn't mention that. We sat down for dinner, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and my late wife's apple pie recipe. I told stories like I always do. Stories of how Ethan used to sneak cookies as a kid, how he got lost once in the backyard, crying until I carried him home on my shoulders. Ethan laughed, but Camille just stared, twirling her wine glass. Then she leaned toward him and whispered in French, "Alessi simple, ton père, comme un vieux meuble." Your father is so simple, like an old piece of furniture. And I froze. For a moment I didn't breathe. My heart didn't even beat. I just stared at the flickering candle in front of me, pretending I hadn't heard. But every word cut through me like a knife. Simple. Old furniture. That's what I'd become to her. Something that existed in the background, worn out, taking up space. I looked at Ethan, waiting for him to react. But he didn't. He smiled politely, pretending not to hear her. Or maybe he understood too and just stayed silent. Do you know what silence does to a man like me? It eats you alive. I excused myself and went to the kitchen. I stood there, hands trembling, holding the pie I'd baked for them. The one my wife used to make. I thought of her, of how proud she'd been of Ethan. And then I thought, would she be proud now? I walked back to the table and placed the pie down gently. Camille smiled at me again, that same fake sweetness, and said in English, "This looks quaint." "Quaint," I repeated softly. "That's a nice word." Ethan shifted uncomfortably, probably feeling the tension now. There was a time I believed kindness could fix anything. That if you showed patience and warmth, people would eventually see your heart. But that night, as she laughed and spoke in French again, mocking my cooking, my house, my stories, I realized some people don't deserve your silence. I could have called her out right there. I could have told her I understood every single cruel word she said. But I didn't. Not yet. Because I wanted to see how far she'd go. And she went far. Too far. She said, again in French, "Alanisora meme passi que nous dysons. Les vieux sont lents." He won't even know what we're saying. Old people are slow. That's when something inside me cracked. But before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you something, my friend. If someone insulted you right to your face, thinking you couldn't understand, would you stay quiet or speak up? Think about it for a second. Because what I did next, I'm not sure if it was the right thing or not. Anyway, after that little question spinning in my head, I took a deep breath. I leaned back in my chair, smiled at Camille and said softly, in perfect French, "C'est impoli de parler d'un homme dans une langue qu'elle comprend." It's rude to speak about a man in a language he understands. Her face turned pale. Ethan looked shocked. The whole room went still. You could have heard a pin drop. She blinked fast, her lips parting, trying to find an excuse, but none came. Oh, I didn't realize you spoke fluently," I said, cutting her off. "I lived in Paris for a decade. My wife taught me enough to know the difference between kindness and arrogance." Ethan stared at me, then at her. "Camille, what did you say?" Her eyes filled with guilt for just a moment, then turned cold again. "Oh, come on, Ethan, it was just a joke," she said. "He's being too sensitive." I laughed. A quiet, broken laugh. "Yes," I whispered, Maybe I am too sensitive. Or maybe respect just means more to people who've lost it once. The rest of the dinner was silent. No one ate the pie. Not a single word was spoken. When they left that night, Ethan hugged me briefly. Camille barely looked at me. I stood at the door, watching them walk away under the streetlight. Him with his arm around her. Me standing alone in the doorway of the house my wife and I built together. I knew that night that something had changed between us, between father and son. And deep down, I feared it wasn't for the better. Because sometimes, my friend, one dinner can break what years of love tried to build. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat by the window with a cup of cold coffee, watching the porch light flicker. The night felt heavier than usual, like it carried the weight of something I couldn't name. Maybe it was disappointment, or maybe it was the quiet fear that I was losing my son. Not to time, but to someone who'd already decided I wasn't worth respecting. I kept replaying her words in my head. Simple. Old furniture. I'd been called many things in my life, but never that. I was a man who built every piece of furniture in this house with his own hands. I'd held a hammer long before I ever held a pen. To her, maybe that made me simple, but to me it meant I'd lived an honest life. The next morning, I went out to the small shed behind my house, my workshop. It still smelled like pine and sawdust. That place had seen every version of me. The young husband, the grieving widower, the proud father. I thought maybe some quiet work would clear my head. But even as I sanded down a piece of wood, I couldn't stop thinking about Ethan. He hadn't called. Not even a text. That silence hurt more than her insult ever could. By noon, I decided to call him. When he answered, his voice sounded distant, polite, but cold. "Hey, Dad." "Hey, son," I said, forcing a light tone. "Did you two get home all right?" "Yeah." Camille was just tired. She didn't mean what she said last night. I paused. "So, she was insulting me?" He went quiet. Then, "She told me you misunderstood." I smiled bitterly, even though he couldn't see it. "Son, I've spoken French longer than you've known her name." He sighed. "Dad, please don't make this bigger than it is. She just comes from a different culture." I felt something inside me tighten. Respect isn't about culture, Ethan. It's about character. He didn't reply. Then he said, "I gotta go, Dad. I'll call you later." And just like that, the line went dead. I stood there, holding the phone, staring at the silent screen. For the first time in my life, my son hung up on me. That night, I sat on the porch again, watching the street. The autumn wind carried the smell of wet leaves. I could almost hear my late wife's voice in the wind, soft, gentle, reminding me not to give up on him. She always believed love could fix anything. I wasn't so sure anymore. The following week, Ethan invited me to dinner at their apartment. I hesitated, but I went. Part of me wanted to believe maybe things would be different. Maybe she'd apologize. When I arrived, Camille greeted me at the door with that same polished smile. "Bonjour, Mr. Parker," she said sweetly. "So glad you could come." Her tone was honey, but her eyes were ice. Their apartment looked like something out of a magazine, sleek, expensive, cold. There was no warmth, no sign of home. Ethan seemed tired, thinner, quieter. He poured wine but didn't meet my eyes. Dinner was civilized. Too civilized. No laughter, no stories. Just fork-scraping plates. Then Camille started talking about Paris, her family's business, her connections. Every word felt like a performance. I stayed polite, nodding, smiling, letting her believe she was in control of the evening. But then something strange happened. While she was in the kitchen, her phone buzzed on the table. Ethan went to get more wine, and I saw a message flash on her screen. It was in French again. My French might be old, but I read it clearly. "Tout avances bien. La vie n'est pas aucun problème. Après le mariage, tout sera à toi." You're doing well. The old man won't be a problem. After the wedding, everything will be yours. My hands went cold. My pulse slowed. I couldn't believe what I just read. When she came back, I acted normal. I didn't say a word. I just smiled. pretending nothing had happened. But inside I was breaking. That text wasn't just an insult. It was a plan. A scheme. I drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I didn't want to believe it, that my son's fiancée might be using him for money, for inheritance, for something darker. But that text, it said enough. That night, I sat in my living room staring at the old family photo on the wall, me, my wife, and Ethan at age 10. His smile was pure then, his heart clean. I whispered to that picture, "Don't worry, kid, your old man's still here. And I'm not letting her destroy what your mother built." The next morning, I called a friend, Mark, a retired detective who owed me a favor. "Mark," I said, "I need you to look into someone, discreetly." "Who?" he asked. "My son's fiancée, Camille DuPont." There was a pause. "You think she's trouble?" "I don't think," I said softly. "I know." A week passed. Every day felt longer than the last. Then Mark called me one evening. "John, you were right to be suspicious." "What did you find?" I asked. "She's got a record. Not criminal here, but financial fraud in France. Used a fake identity once. Changed her name when she moved here." I felt my stomach twist. "Does Ethan know?" "Doubt it," Mark said. "She's good at covering her tracks." I thanked him and hung up. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the floor. My hands trembled, not with anger, but fear. Fear for my son. You see, I could handle her insults. I could take her arrogance. But I couldn't stand by while she destroyed my boy. So I made a decision that night. A dangerous one. I was going to expose her, but not through anger. Through truth. And the truth, my friend, has a way of revealing itself when you least expect it. You know, when you've lived as long as I have, you learn that truth doesn't need to scream. It just needs the right moment to whisper. After Mark told me about Camille's past, I sat in my chair for hours, staring at the old clock ticking on the wall. Every sound echoed like a reminder. "Don't wait too long, old man. Your son's walking into a trap." I wanted to call Ethan right away, but I stopped myself. If I accused her without proof he could see, he'd side with her. Love, or what he thought was love, had blinded him. I had to be patient. I had to show him, not tell him. So I waited. I planned. And every day, I pretended nothing had changed. One evening, I got an invitation from Ethan. "Dad, Camille and I are hosting a small dinner next week. We'd love for you to come." I smiled bitterly at the text. A dinner, I thought. The same place where everything started. Maybe that's where it needed to end. I spent the next few days preparing. Not in anger, but with quiet precision. I printed copies of the documents Mark had sent me. Her aliases, her fraud history, even an old French newspaper clipping mentioning her involvement in a financial scheme. I tucked them neatly in an envelope and slipped it inside my coat. When the evening came, I dressed carefully. The same brown cardigan my late wife loved, the one that made her say, "You look like someone's favorite memory." I looked in the mirror and said softly, "Wish me luck, darling. I'm doing this for our boy." When I arrived, Camille greeted me with a hug that felt colder than snow. "Bonsoir, Mr. Parker," she said sweetly, her voice dripping with politeness. "I hope tonight we can start fresh." "Oh, I'd like that very much," I said with a smile that hid every bit of what I knew. Ethan looked happier than before. Maybe she was pretending better. Maybe he was trying harder to believe her story. Either way, I saw a tiredness behind his eyes, the kind that comes from living with a lie. We sat for dinner. Candlelight flickering, soft music playing in the background. Could have been beautiful if it wasn't so fake. Camille poured me a glass of wine. "To family," she said, raising her glass. "To truth," I murmured back. She didn't catch it. The meal went on quietly. She spoke in French again here and there, maybe testing if I'd react. I didn't. I just smiled, watching her every move. After dessert, I looked at Ethan and said, "Son, there's something I want to show you." He frowned. "Now? Is everything okay, Dad?" I nodded slowly. "It's about Camille." Her fork froze halfway to her mouth. "Dad," Ethan said carefully, Please don't start. I held up my hand. Just let me speak. 5 minutes. That's all I ask. I reached into my coat and placed the envelope on the table. The paper made a quiet thump, but it echoed through the silence. Camille's face changed, not fear, not yet, but recognition. Like she already knew what was inside. Ethan, I said softly, I know you love her, and I know you think I'm old and stubborn, but what I'm about to show you, it's not about me. It's about your safety. He looked between us, confused. Camille forced a laugh. This is absurd. Mr. Parker, you're overreacting again. I slid the envelope toward him. Then let him see. Ethan hesitated, then opened it. He read quietly at first. Then his eyes widened. Camille, what is this? She started speaking fast in French. Ce n'est pas que tu penses. C'est un malentendu. It's not what you think. It's a misunderstanding. I answered calmly in French. Non c'est la vérité. Tu le sais. No, it's the truth. And you know it. Ethan looked between us again. You both speak French? I nodded slowly. Your fiancée and I have had more conversations than you realize. Her mask cracked then. Her voice trembled. Ethan, I can explain. That article, it's from years ago. I made mistakes. Yes, but I changed. I watched my son's face shift. Disbelief, then confusion, then anger. You lied to me, Camille. You told me you came here for a new life. You said you had no secrets. She stood abruptly, eyes wet with tears that might have been real, or might have just been another performance. I did what I had to do. You don't understand. He stood too, voice rising. Then help me understand. Why are there 2 names on your records? Why didn't you tell me? She didn't answer. Instead, she turned toward me, and for the first time, the sweetness vanished completely. Her eyes burned with pure hatred. You couldn't just stay out of it, could you, old man? She hissed in French. You just had to ruin everything. I looked her straight in the eye. I'm not ruining anything. I'm saving my son. Ethan stepped between us, his voice breaking. Camille, I can't do this. I need time to think. She grabbed her purse, muttering under her breath, and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the lights flickered. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan sank into a chair, rubbing his face. Dad, why didn't you tell me sooner? I sighed, feeling the years in my bones. Because I wanted you to see it for yourself. Words don't open eyes, truth does. He didn't speak for a long time. I just sat there, watching the boy I'd raised sit in the ruins of the illusion he'd built. And I realized, sometimes protecting someone doesn't mean shielding them from pain. It means letting them feel it so they'll never fall for it again. When I finally stood to leave, Ethan said quietly, Dad, thank you. I nodded. Always, son. Always. As I stepped out into the cold night, I looked up at the dark sky and whispered, You can rest now, darling. He's safe. But little did I know, Camille wasn't done yet, and the storm was far from over. You know, son, I thought it was over that night. When Camille stormed out, I believed that was the end of it. That my boy was finally free. But I should have known better. People like her don't walk away quietly. For a few days, everything was calm. Ethan didn't call and I didn't push him. I figured he needed space. When you find out someone you love has been lying to you, your heart needs time to stop shaking before your voice can find its strength again. I spent my mornings in the workshop again, sanding old wood, repairing chairs that didn't really need fixing. Sometimes, doing something simple with your hands helps your mind heal. But then, one morning, as I was polishing a table leg, I heard my phone buzz. It was Ethan. Dad, he said softly. She came by last night. I froze. Camille? Yeah, she wanted to talk. She was crying, apologizing. Said she only hid her past because she thought I'd never love her if I knew. I stayed quiet, letting him talk. She said she's leaving town, he continued, going back to France to start over. Do you believe her? I asked. He hesitated. I want to. That answer told me everything. He still loved her, even after everything. And love, It's a dangerous thing when it blinds you. I told him, son, if she's leaving, let her go. Don't chase ghosts. Some doors close for a reason. He didn't reply, but I could feel the conflict in his silence. That night, I sat outside again, sipping tea under the dim porch light. I told myself maybe this time, things would finally settle. But the peace didn't last long. The next day, I went to town to buy some paint. When I came back, I noticed something strange. The gate to my backyard was open. I never leave it open. I stepped inside carefully, my old heart thumping just a bit faster. The shed door was ajar, and when I pushed it open, my stomach dropped. My workshop was a mess, with scattered, shelves broken, and the photograph of my wife that hung above my workbench, torn in half. For a moment, I couldn't move. My hands shook as I picked up the broken frame. Her smiling face, the same one that kept me strong through every storm, was ruined. Then I saw something written on the back wall, in red paint, dripping and fresh. Just one word. Traitor. Traitor. I didn't need a detective to know who did it. I sat on the floor, staring at that word until the daylight faded. My body was tired, but my soul, it burned. Not with hate, but with heartbreak. How could someone carry so much poison in their heart? That night, Ethan called again, his voice panicked. Dad, did something happen? Camille's gone. She's not answering calls. And I got a message from her friend. She said Camille blames us for ruining her life. I took a breath. Ethan, listen to me carefully. She came here. What? She trashed my shed. Wrote something on my wall. He went silent for a long time. Then he said quietly, I'm so sorry, Dad. It's not your fault, I said. You didn't invite the storm, but you can decide not to drown in it. He promised to come by the next morning. When he arrived, he saw the damage himself. He walked around the shed, touching the broken shelves, looking at his mother's ruined picture. His eyes filled with tears. I can't believe she'd do this. I can, I said softly, because I saw the truth in her eyes the first day she walked into my house. He helped me clean up, but the silence between us spoke louder than words. When we were done, he sat on the steps outside the shed. Dad, how do you always stay so calm? If someone did this to me, I'd lose it. I smiled faintly. I learned a long time ago that anger only gives them what they want. Peace. That's the revenge they can't stand. That evening, Ethan stayed for dinner. It was the first time in months he'd eaten at home without tension in the air. We talked about Mom, about his childhood, about simple things that used to matter. And for a little while, I saw my boy again. Not the man torn by love, but the son I raised. But right when I thought the storm had passed, life decided to remind me that peace never lasts forever. 2 nights later, I got a knock on the door around 11 p.m. When I opened it, 2 police officers stood there. Mr. Parker? Yes. We received a complaint from a Ms. Camille DuPont. She claims you threatened her and vandalized her property. I blinked, confused. What? That's ridiculous. Sir, we're just following up. Do you mind if we take your statement? I told them everything. About the text, the dinner, the shed, the word she'd painted. One of the officers took notes, the other watched me carefully. When I finished, he sighed. We've dealt with people like her before. She's manipulative. But we'll need evidence, sir. I nodded, my voice calm. You'll have it. I saved everything. After they left, I sat on the couch, staring at the quiet house around me. My wife's voice echoed in my heart again, like it always did when I was at my lowest. You can't control what people do, John, but you can control what you stand for. The next day, I gave the police copies of her threatening texts and the photos of my shed. They thanked me and said they'd follow up. And as the days went by, Camille vanished. No calls, no messages, just silence. Ethan looked torn, but he started spending more time with me again. We rebuilt the shed together, board by board, and maybe in that quiet work, we rebuilt something else too, trust. I thought the story was finally ending there. But life had one more twist left for this old man. Because 3 months later, just when everything seemed peaceful again, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Just one line written in elegant handwriting. You may have won the battle, old man, but the war isn't over. You know, when you get old, people think your story's already over. But sometimes the last chapter is the one that truly defines you. That letter, the one that said, "The war isn't over," sat on my table for days. I didn't tell Ethan about it. I didn't want to worry him. He was finally smiling again. Finally healing. I couldn't pull him back into that darkness. But deep down, I knew Camille wasn't gone for good. People like her don't vanish, they wait. They plan. I started locking the doors tighter, checking the yard every night before bed. Maybe it sounds paranoid, but after what she did to my shed, I wasn't taking chances. Then one morning, a neighbor knocked on my door. "John," she said, "I think you should come see this." I followed her down the street. There, parked near the corner, was a black car. Windows tinted, engine off. She said it had been there every night for a week. My stomach turned. That evening, I called Mark again, my old detective friend. "Mark," I said quietly, "I think she's back." He came by that night, checked the car, took a few pictures. The license plate was fake. "She's watching," he said. "Be careful, John." For a few nights, the car kept coming back. Then suddenly it stopped. No more visits. No more letters. Just quiet. I wish I could say I relaxed. But a man's instincts don't fade with age. They sharpen. And something in my gut told me the story wasn't over yet. A few weeks later, I got a call from Ethan. "Dad, you won't believe this. Camille called me." I went still. "What did she say?" "She's in town. She wants to meet. Says she wants to apologize to both of us in person." I almost laughed. "Apologize?" I said. "That's not in her vocabulary." "Dad, maybe she means it. Maybe she's trying to make peace." "Ethan," I said softly, "people don't destroy peace and then come back to build it." He was quiet. Then he said, "Please, just one meeting. For me." And how could I say no to that? A father will walk into fire if his son asks him to. So we agreed to meet at a small cafe downtown, public, safe, neutral ground. When I walked in, she was already there, dressed in white, hair tied back, sipping coffee like she hadn't burned half my life months ago. "Mr. Parker," she said softly, smiling that same polished smile. "You look well." I sat across from her. "You look the same." Ethan joined a minute later, sitting between us like a bridge built over broken glass. She started talking about her past, her mistakes, her regrets. Her voice trembled at all the right moments. If I didn't know better, I might have believed her. But her eyes gave her away. Still cold. Still calculating. She said, "I wanted to apologize for what happened. I was angry, lost. I didn't know how to handle being exposed." I nodded slowly. "That's a start. But apologies mean little without truth." She hesitated, then looked at Ethan. "I really did love you," she whispered. "But your father, he never gave me a chance." And there it was, the twist of blame, gentle and venomous. I leaned forward. "Camille," I said quietly, "you had every chance, but you used every one of them to lie." Her eyes flashed. "You ruined my life." "No," I said softly, "you ruined your own." For a long moment, none of us spoke. Then she reached into her purse and placed a small envelope on the table. "This is for you," she said to Ethan. "Proof that I've moved on. A new job offer. A clean start." She stood to leave, gave me one last look and said in French, "Le vieux lion pense tu es gagné." The old lion thinks he's won. I smiled faintly. Only because the cub he raised learned to roar. She froze for a moment, then walked away. Out the door, down the street, into the crowd, and that was the last time we ever saw her. Ethan sat there, stunned. Then he opened the envelope. Inside wasn't a job offer, it was a check. Cashier's check. Made out to him for $50,000. "What the?" he started. I stopped him. "Don't touch it." He looked at me. "Why not?" "Because that's not a gift," I said. "That's bait. Keep it and you'll owe her forever. Return it and you'll finally be free." He stared at the check for a long time, then tore it in half. I'm done with her. And in that moment, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. My son choosing right over easy. We walked out of that cafe side by side, the sun dipping low over the horizon. And for the first time in years, I felt light again. Like the ghosts that haunted my home had finally left. A month later, Ethan met someone new. A kind soul named Claire. Gentle, genuine. The kind of woman who looked at people with warmth instead of judgment. When he brought her to meet me, I could see the difference in his eyes. This wasn't illusion. This was peace. Sometimes I still think about Camille not with hate but with understanding. She was a storm that passed through our lives, breaking everything fragile so we could rebuild something stronger. And you know what I've learned, my friend? People who hide behind lies always think they're smarter than the rest. But truth doesn't rush. It waits. And when it finally comes, it doesn't shout. It whispers, quietly, I told you so. So if you've ever been betrayed, if someone's ever insulted you thinking you'd never fight back, remember this. You don't need revenge to win. Just patience. Because karma speaks fluent truth in every language. That's the story, son. The one about how my boy almost lost everything because love blinded him, and how an old man proved that wisdom doesn't fade with age. And maybe that's what I've been trying to say all along. That respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn word by word, action by action, truth by truth. Now tell me, my friend, what would you have done if you were sitting in my chair that night, across from the woman who tried to destroy your family? Would you have forgiven her? Or walked away? Either way, I hope you remember, the language of truth never needs translation.